Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Tech, and today I'm going to compare the Dimensity 1200 versus the Apple A14 Bionic chipset. I will be giving you some crazy comparison between these chipsets, so without further ado, let's get started. So in today's video, we are going to compare my Dimensity 1200 and A14 Bionic chipset. I will be giving a complete review, differences, pros and cons, benchmarks, and 229, Geekbench 5, and also gaming, and also some other crazy stuff about this processor. So make sure you watch till the end. So as we compare the 8-core MediaTek Dimensity 1200 with a 6-core of Apple A14 Bionic chipset, hence you will find the pros and cons of each chip's technical specs and comprehensive test and benchmark like Antutu and Geekbench. So let's start with the review. As you guys can see, the Apple A14 Bionic chipset crashed the 1200 in the CPU performance. As you guys can see, the CPU performance gains 97% on the Apple A14 Bionic. But the MediaTek Dimensity 1200 only kept on 74%. The gaming performance also goes to A14 Bionic because it goes to 84%. But the MediaTek Dimensity also gains 72%. So that means the CPU performance is better than the gaming performance. I'm really confused in this scenario. Now let's talk about the battery life. The battery life also goes to A14 Bionic. Wow. And the Dimensity 1200 kept on 82%. Now let's talk about the key differences. They both share the same specs like performance and pretty much everything stuff, but they do have pros and cons. The pros of MediaTek Dimensity 1200 that it's only using 2 more cores than A14 Bionic, which is 6-core processor. Now the pros of A14 Bionic chipset though has a smaller size transistor, 5nm versus 6nm. The 5nm fabricated processor used on A14 Bionic and a 6nm processor is used on Dimensity 1200. And also shows better Antutu benchmark gains up to 7% and also have the better set instruction architecture on the A14 Bionic chipset beats the 1200 in key differences. Now let's talk about the N229 benchmark. We will be comparing CPU, GPU, RAM, and I/O performance in different scenarios. As you guys can see on the screen right now, the N229 benchmark crashes the Dimensity 1200, gains the A14 Bionic up to 7%. 7,20,321 score gains on A14 Bionic, but the Dimensity 1200 kept on 6,74,561. Beats the A14 Bionic beats the Dimensity 1200 and A229 benchmark. As you guys can see on the screen right now, the CPU performance also goes to A14 Bionic, gaining 1,85,620. The GPU performance also goes to A14 Bionic chipset, gaining 2,85,864 instead of 2,33,643 that on Dimensity 1200. The memory Dimensity 1200 gains more performance than the A14 Bionic because A14 Bionic uses the NVMe. The Dimensity 1200 uses 3.1 boost, UFS 3.1 boost. The UX also gains more performance because the Dimensity 1200 can support 144 Hz refresh rate, but the A14 Bionic support only 60 Hz. So that was N229 benchmark. Let's see next. Now let's talk about the Geekbench 5 scores. As you guys can see on the screen right now, the single core performance gains up to 64%, beating the Dimensity 1200 by almost 64%. Wow. But the multi-core performance also beats the Dimensity 1200 by gaining 23%. That means the A14 Bionic has a better CPU speed and also have the better image compression, face detection, speech recognition, machine learning, camera shooting, HTML5, SQL Lite. That is, the AI works because A14 Bionic uses the better AI set instruction than the Dimensity 1200. Now let's talk about the 3D mark. The 3D mark shows the performance of A14 Bionic of 7,523, beating the Dimensity 1200 by 80%. Wow, I'm amazed to see that the Dimensity 1200 cannot outperform the A14 Bionic chipset. because Dimensity 1200 is also a flagship level processor. But I'm also a little disappointed to see that. The MediaTek Dimensity 1200 scores only 44,180, but the A14 Bionic chipset scores the 7,523, beating the Dimensity 1200 by 80%. The gaming performance, the PUBG Mobile support 90 FPS on the Dimensity 1200, but the A14 Bionic is only kept on 60 FPS because the Apple iPhone 12 Pro Max does not support the 90 Hz refresh rate or the 120 Hz refresh rate. Now let's talk about the CPU specs of both chipsets. The Dimensity 1200 is using the Cortex A78 and the Cortex A78 on the 3 processor and the Cortex A55 for the power efficiency processor. But the A14 Bionic uses only 2 cores in the 5 Storm, that is 3.1 GHz, and a 4 efficiency core of 1.8 GHz in Ice Storm. And also you guys can see that Dimensity 1200 uses 8 core, but A14 Bionic only gains 6 cores. But the frequency is clearly ahead to the A14 Bionic because it's 3.1 MHz and the frequency of Dimensity 1200 is 3 GHz. And also the A14 Bionic has a better instruction set and it's also the latest one. That's why it's gained more image comprehension and other AI stuff. And also uses the 5nm fabricated processor on A14 Bionic, but the Dimensity 1200 uses the 6nm processor. And also the power efficient is A14 Bionic because it's only 6 watt, but the TDP of 1200 is 10 watt. So that's clearly ahead to the A14 Bionic chipset. Now let's talk about the GPU scores of the Dimensity 1200 and the A14 Bionic. As you guys can see on the screen right now, we don't have much knowledge about the Apple custom GPU, but we do have knowledge of Dimensity 1200. They are using the Valhalla architecture. The GPU frequency is kept on at 50 MHz, and also execution units is 9. But the Apple GPU is unknown, but we only can see the execution units of 4. And also the Dimensity 1200 have 144 shading units and DirectX 12 version. Now let's talk about the RAM. They both use the same RAM, LPDDR4X, but we also don't have any much knowledge about their frequency. The memory frequency of the LPDDR4X on the Dimensity 1200 is 42 and 66 MHz, that is 4.2 GHz, and also the bus is 4x 16-bit, that means 64-bit. The max memory bandwidth of the Apple 14 Bionic is 42 GB per second, and the max size on this processor on the Dimensity 1200 is 16 GB. That means this processor can support 16 GB of RAM. But the Apple A14 Bionic can support only 6 GB of RAM. So that's plus point for the Dimensity 1200. Now let's talk about the media. They both use the neural engine. MediaTek Dimensity 1200 uses the UFS 3.1 and the Apple A14 Bionic uses the NVMe. The max display resolution of the Apple A14 Bionic and the Dimensity 1200 is the same because that is Quad HD Plus resolution. But the maximum camera resolution of the Dimensity 1200 is that they can support 200 megapixel of camera. But the Apple A14 Bionic chipset only can support 12 megapixel. And their video capture and video playback is also the same, video at 4K at 30 FPS and playback on also 4K at 30 FPS. The audio codecs and video codecs is also the same. Now let's talk about the connectivity. They both support the 5G on these both phones. But the Dimensity 1200 can go LTE 819. But the A14 Bionic is only kept on LTE Cat 18. Also, they both support the 5G. Download speed and upload speeds are also the same on both phones, but the Dimensity 1200 uses the 5.2 Bluetooth version, but the A14 Bionic uses the 5.0. The Dimensity 1200 is also a newer processor because it was announced on January 2021, but A14 Bionic was announced on September 2020. These both are the flagship level performance processor. So that was all for this video. If you enjoyed this video, then a sub to the channel will be awesome. So if you want to buy an Apple, so make sure you go with the newer version of Apple A15 Bionic chipset. I already made a video on that, so make sure you watch also that. But instead you are an Android user, so I will also recommend the Dimensity 1200 because it's a capable chipset with an amazing features, and also have the better instruction set and can support 200 megapixel camera, and also can support 144 Hz refresh rate, and also have the 5.2 Bluetooth newer version. So if you are an Apple user, I will recommend a newer processor. And if you are a MediaTek user and going for the mid-range devices, because a lot of manufacturer companies are going with Dimensity 1200 because of their mid-range devices, so I will also recommend to buy that. Instead, if you want to buy a flagship level performance processor or a performance phone, so I will also recommend a newer version of the Dimensity processor. I also made a video on MediaTek Dimensity 9000, so make sure you watch also that. So that's all for this video. If you like this video, then a sub to the channel will be amazing, and also leave a like and comment down below your thoughts. Thank you for watching. It's Rick, and see ya in the next video.